All right. So blessing, right? It just appeared to me now that our last class wasn't pushed to GitHub. So I just did that now. We can check for the latest updates. So in our last class, we talked about array mapping and array filter. Let me share my screen. All right, please confirm if you can see my screen.
So you're muted.
Thank you. So I have been talking actually. I don't know I was muted. I'll come again. All right. So I said in our last class we talked about objects, right? And we talked about the attributes or the properties and the methods. The properties and the method. So these are the properties. Just like as an human, you have your name, your other name, your last name, your gender. You have so many other attributes, including your complexion. And then you have your method that affects the things you can do. As a human, you can eat, you can sleep, you can do many other things. So this will come in as methods. So there are things that are triggered before they start running, and then once you are done running that operation, it is stopped. So today we'll be working on callbacks. I already created a callbacks class, the callback the JS file rather, to guide us. Okay, so this is the file we'll be working on today. All right, please give me a moment. Okay, I'm back. So talking about callbacks, callback is just like you saying I will call back later. Just like the name implies, it means it will call this operation, it will call this function later. A callback is a function passed as an argument to another function. So let me show you something. I think somewhere here, somewhere in arrays, I was saying that this filter function will receive another function. So this another function is a callback, right? So this filter function will trigger this callback. And that means I will call it later. It is calling back this function later. I think I did something very similar to that here. Yeah, this one. So I have this filter function accepting another function as an argument. And that means it will call this function later. That makes it a callback. Let me give us an example. So we should be familiar with this function, my first. And then we can say console.log hello. Or let's just create another function called display something. Display something, which will receive an argument of what we want to display. We can say message, and then we'll say console.log message. So what are we doing? We are saying display something. We want to say hello from first function. All right, so I'm back. So we want to say hello from first function. And again, we want to have another function here. And say sorry, please. That was an issue with my network. All right, so here we have our second function. Also, what do you want to do with this function? We want to display something. Now say hello from second function. Hello from second function. Right, and then what do we want to do? We want to trigger my first and my second. So okay. So we have a very beautiful page here. We're coming to the console. All right, so I think I have an error here. All right, so we are good. Okay, so you can see I have hello from first function and I have hello from second function. If you notice here, this function is calling another function. It is calling this display something function. It is calling the display the display something function. But the issue with this is that it will always call this function. That's number one. And number two, it will always do this thing you are putting here. Which means this is my second button, my second function rather, it will always put this in the console, hello from second function. Why? Because it is triggering this display something. However, we may want to say, okay, let's just do some random things. Let's say console.log doing some random stuff. Right. And then at the end of doing this random stuff, we want to do something. But we don't have an idea what we want this thing to do. We just want it to do something. So what are we going to do? We are going to receive the function we want it to call as a callback, which means after running this thing, after doing whatever you want to do, you want to call back this function that we passed in. So what do we do? Say callback, my callback, or let's just say callback. believe everyone can still hear me. All right. So let's just say we receive a callback, and then what are we doing? We are saying callback. So we can remove this from here. Let me remove this my first function too. So you can see callback is not a function. Why? Because we are not passing in a callback yet. So we'll pass in a callback. This is an arrow function or an anonymous function that will do what? It should display something and say we are done running. Can you see that? Let me, yes. So what is happening here is that we are calling this function, it's receiving a callback, and then after the original logic of the function, it will now call our callback. And what callback means is basically that I will call it later. I'll call back later, just like the name implies. Let's do something again. Let's say aside from this callback, we also want to receive message that we are going to log in the console. Message that we are going to log in the console. So what we are going to do here is just replace its message. Again, we'll be passing in a message here. Message as arguments. So what is happening here is that this my second function is receiving two arguments. The first argument is the message, which is meant to be a string, and here we have the string. The second one is a callback function, which we are passing this anonymous function for. So what is going to happen is that it will log this message to the console, just like we have here, and then call back our callback function. And then it will call back our callback function. All right, so let me come back here and load message as argument, which is what we are passing in here, and then display something will run, which is our callback function. We are done running. Does anyone have any question at this time? Wọ́n ti parí o, wọ́n fẹ́ ṣèṣòro lálẹ́ yìí. Bóyá tó bá ti dàárọ̀ la máa gbé wá sọ́dọ̀ rẹ̀. All right, Daniel, I think you are raising your hand.
Sir, please come back on the callback because I don't understand it very well. Just one more time, please.
All right, so what I'm saying is that a callback function is just like a function that will be called later by another function. So it will call it back when I'm done. Let's say I'm the function now, and you're passing me a function to call. I'll call the function back later when I'm done doing things I have to do. That's basically what a callback function means. And how do you know a callback function? It is being passed to a function as an argument. These things we pass in here are arguments. Are you getting me? So we are telling this my second function that you receive two things. You receive a message and a callback function. What are you doing with the message? You are logging into the console. And what are you doing with the function? You are calling it. When you are done logging to the console, you call the fallback the callback function. And that's what we are doing here. We trigger this my second function, passing the message, and then passing the callback function. Let's do something. Let's say I want to create a function just to make this thing clear. Function log that we are running. right? And what will this function do? It will display this thing to the console. That's basically what this function do. So what we are going to do here is to carry this function and say this. So this my second function is receiving two arguments. First is the message, which is a string, and the second one is a callback function, which is this one. So when it is done logging this to the console, it will call this function. And what does the function do? It also log this to the console. So let's check that again. You can see what we have is still the same. Does that explain your question? All right. Does anyone else have any question regarding that? All right. So moving on, we'll be going to promises. We'll be going to promises. So we'll be moving to promises. And what does promises mean? I promise. Okay, Faith, you want to see something?
In my head. Okay, I just want to be sure I understand. So just the way you have a function, and for you to be able to print it, you have to call the function. So if you're calling the function under the bracket, you can call in another function as an argument inside of it, and then it will print whatever is inside the argument of the function you just called.
All right. So first of all, we are doing print because that's basically what we can do at this time, right? The function might be doing something else aside from printing to the console. When you're working on an enterprise system, you are not printing to the console. You are doing actual code operations. Are you getting me? But what I'm trying to explain here is that this second function will trigger the function that is being passed here, which is this one. Are you getting me?
Yes, so you're calling this log that we are running under
Yes.
my second. So the whatever the value is in this function of log that we are running is what is going to print when you do this. Like, I just want to be clear that okay, what I'm understanding is not the wrong thing.
Yes, that's exactly what's happening.
Okay, thank you.
All right. So now we'll be moving to promises. Promises. And what does promises mean? Promises are just the system telling you, or the function telling you, that I promise a result. I promise that I'll give you something. Promises. So what I want to do here is console.log. Do we even have to log that? I don't think so. Okay, so let's begin. Like I said, a promise is like a function that promise to give you back something, but not immediately. It's a function that promises to give you back something. It's a function that promises to give you back something, but not immediately. And how do you declare a promise? Let's say, let my promise be a new, let my promise be a new promise, right? The promise is an object. And then what is this object expecting? It's expecting a function. This function expects, and this function also expects the sources and the rejects. Let's say resolve and reject, right? So what's going to happen here? Let's say we have a very long-running task, and then because this function is here, we are going to, after our long-running task is successful, we are going to say my result, or let's just say result. Yeah, we are calling this one, so we are saying result, and this expects a value. That's the result of this guy here. So we are going to say hello world. So let's say promise is successful. Promise is successful, and then for some funny reason, you can say this thing can also fail, which is the reject. Something went wrong. Something went wrong. Something went wrong. So let's run this. Let's just come here and say my promise. So when you have a promise, right, you can use it like this. Let's say I have my promise dot then, which means if it is successful, it will receive a value, which is the value we have in the result. You can say data. And what do we want to do with this data? We want to log into the console. You can say console.log data. Let me call this response. Console.log response. And then if it fails, we can say .catch, which means it will catch the error that we got. And then here we have access to the reason why it failed. Again, we can say console.log logic field, and then we can also put the reason it failed. So I have this promise here, which is an instance of a promise. So when the promise is done running, when the function is done running, when this result is triggered, we are going to this then, the callback function in this then will be triggered, which means we are going to log what we got as the response to the console. And then if it's failed, which is to catch the error and put the reason it's failed in the console. Let's try and see what we have in our console. You can see we have promise is successful. So why we need this is the most often when you need a promise here is when something is not going to return back what you expect immediately. Maybe it's going to take up to 3 seconds or maybe 5 seconds or so on. So that means you have to wait for it. And then you can say promise.then, the value.then, that means when it is successful, it should run this. And then if it fails, it should run this. So what I want us to do is to say, just give me a moment. I want us to sleep this for like 3 or 5 seconds. I want it to take like 5 seconds before this resolve will be triggered. So what can we do? We can create all right, we can do this. We can say set timeout. So the set timeout expects 2 things. It's the handler, which is what you want to happen after the time you set as exceeded. So let's say I want to call this resolve after 3,000 milliseconds. That's 3 seconds. Look, that should work. Yes. So I want to call this resolve. This is an arrow function. After this 3 seconds, after this 3,000 milliseconds. So the expected value here is 3,000. Is milliseconds rather. So 3,000 milliseconds makes 3 seconds. So which means this set timeout will make our system wait for 3 seconds before triggering this resolve, before calling this resolve method. So let's see if that will work. You can see we have log field, something went wrong. Let's just say we want to wait here. I guess that should work. As you can see here, let me reload again. After 3 seconds, the promise is successful will log in our console, which means it is calling this method after this 3 seconds. And that is why we have this then, which means at the end of this guy, if the resolve method is called, we want to log this to the console. And this is getting interesting. This is getting interesting. Does anyone have any question? Let me reiterate on what I said again. So this is a promise, and this promise expects a callback function. The callback function also expects 2 functions, which is the resolve and the reject. Let's do this thing one by one. Let's say function promise handler is a function. Yes, it's a function that receive let's say success and then failure. Right. So we are going to copy what we have here, put it here. And we want to say this is actually success and this is failure. So this is going to receive callback. It's going to receive promise handler. So let me reiterate again. This is a promise. It is receiving a callback, which is this promise handler as the argument. So wherever you see a promise, you can wait for the promise to finish executing, and then you do whatever you want to do, and then you do whatever you want to do with the results. Or let me just change it. Well, you can use response. And then after the promise is done running, then do whatever you want to do with the results. And if in the process of it running, it fails, maybe there's an exception, there's an error, you do what? You catch the error, So it won't start breaking your application. You can catch the error and do whatever you want to do with the error. So let's come here and run again. You can see we have promise is successful, which is coming here after 3 seconds. After 3 seconds. Do we understand that? Does everyone understand that? You can just use your emoji if you do. I guess nobody understands. All right, so let me come again. So the purpose of a promise in JavaScript is for you to know that, okay, this thing is promising me that I'll return you something, but I don't know when I'll return it. However, I promise that I will return it. Are you getting me? I promise that I'll return it. I think the issue we are having is asynchronous and asynchronous and await. All right, so this is a promise handler, which is doing what? It is calling this function after 3 seconds. It is calling this success function after, let me do this. Let me change this to what we can understand. So this is a function that we are all used to, we are familiar with, right? And this sets timeout. What sets timeout does is that it triggers what you have in your function after the time, that's the interval you added. So me adding 3,000 means 3 seconds. So this 3,000 means it's actually 3 it's actually 3 milliseconds, which is actually 3 seconds. It means this thing will trigger this success after 3 seconds. And then when the success is triggered, when the promise triggers a success or the resolve, it's actually resolved. When it triggers the resolve, it means the promise has successfully finished what it is doing, and it is returning us the value. Then how do we get the value? We can say then, which means when the promise has finished running. When the promise has finished running, what do we want to do with the results? Let me change this to results. What are we doing with the results? And let's say the promise isn't running successfully. Maybe it's failed at some point. We want to be able to catch the error. We want to be able to know what went wrong and then do whatever we want to do with it. So like I said, a promise is like a function that promises you that I'll bring you back something when I'm done. I'll give you something when I'm done. I'll give you something when I'm done. I'll give you something when I'm done. Does anyone understand me? I want to confirm if we are still connected. All right. Luke. I think that's a GitHub classroom. Our community manager will address that at the end of this class. And then for the attendance link as well, he'll drop it at the end of the class. All right. So back to what we are doing. All right. I'm back, Ngozi. So let me just give us another example of this promise. So I'm going to comment this out, and then I'm going to create a new promise. So let's say constant new promise is a new promise actually. It's a new promise. Let's change this to promise. So it's a new promise. And like I said, a promise will receive a function. So here we put an anonymous function. This is how we do anonymous function, right? Confirm that, please. This is how we do an anonymous function, something like this. Just use the emoji to confirm that. All right. And I said inside our anonymous function, the promise will receive two functions as well, which is the resolve and the reject. So let me come again. We have a new promise, and then it will receive a function. The function is also expected to receive two other functions, which is the resolve and the reject. So the resolve will be triggered when it is successful, when what you have here when what you have in your actual logic is successful. And then the reject will run when it fails, right? So what we are going to do here is to say we just want to resolve that it is successful, and then we can say we want to declare a variable a constant final result is what 777, or let's just say 122. And then what are we doing? We want to trigger this resolve method, and this resolve method is expected to receive the final value. You know, this promise is saying that I promise to give you something, right? I don't know when I'll give you, and I don't know what I'm going to give you, but I promise that I'll give you something. So now that we are resolved, we want to trigger this resolve now, which means this promise is successful. The person that triggered this promise will not be wondering that, but you promised me that you give me something. Where's that thing you want to give me? Then we are going to pass it to this resolve. Okay, we'll trigger this method and pass the final value that we want to give back the person that called this method, that called this function. We want to give this back to the person that called this function. So what we can do is that we can say promise dot then, which means when you say then, it means when it is fulfilled. That means when it is successful. Again, it is going to, so this then is like it actually represents this resolve. So the then actually represents the resolve. When you trigger the resolve, you have this, what you have here is going to be called. So when the then is being triggered, it is expected to receive a value, which means, okay, that thing that you promised also, pass it when you want to call this function. We'll now say results. We'll receive the results here and say console.log results. Let me take this again. So we have a promise, right? The promise expects us to pass in a function. And the function expects two other functions, which is the resolve and the reject. Or let me say the function here expects. It expects that when it is being triggered, to pass in those two things. It's going to receive, not expect. So the promise is going to expect a function, and then the function is going to receive two other functions when the promise is being triggered. And then what's the first function? The first function is actually what will be triggered when it is successful. And the second function is what will be triggered when it fails. So what we are doing here is just assigning a value to this final result, and then we are calling this result function. And like I said, this is a promise. I promised the person that it will give you something. So how do we return back what we promised? We pass it to this function. Like, okay, this function that will be triggered when it is successful, just passing the value. So the person that triggered the function will be able to access it. So now that we have our promise here, we can say then, which means when the promise is done running. Then when the promise is done running, if you trigger this function, which is this one, and you know that this function will want to give us what we were expecting. If you want to give us what we were expecting, which is this final result, we can now receive the final result here and log it to the console. So if I come back here and reload, you can see I already have 1, 2, 3. Why? Because it was successful. It is successful and it is giving us our value. Again, if I come here and say I don't want to resolve, I just want the person to think this thing failed at some point, I can just say reject. I say something went wrong. Right? You can see I already have an error here telling me in a promise something went wrong, which is our message. And it is uncaught, which means you didn't undo this error. Maybe you are not aware that this error is going to happen. It is uncaught, which means it can break your application. So how do we catch that error? We'll come back here after this our then. We'll come back and say catch. In case there's an error. Again, we want to have access to the error, which is this error message. To say error. And what are we doing? What are we doing with the error? We want to log it to the console. So if I come back here, you can see I don't have, let me just put an error prefix here so it's really confusing us. We want to log it to the console. You can see we have error here, which means this function is not running successfully. Why? Because we are calling the reject function, which means something really went wrong. If you know that what you are doing in your promise is successful, you want to trigger the result and not the reject. Do we understand that? Oh, very good. We now have people that understand. So that's fine. So let me just take it one more time. This is a promise, and like I said, a promise is like our function telling us, okay, don't worry, I'll do what I have to do, and I promise that when I'm done, I'll give you something. However, if in the process of trying to trying to get this thing that I want to give you, something went wrong, I'll also let you know, which is why we are also have this reject. I promise you something, I'll give you. But in case I'm not able to give you that thing, I'll let you know that something went wrong. And you know what went wrong. Are you getting me now? So inside our promise handler, is it promise handler or the executor? I can call it promise handler. Inside our promise handler, we'll do whatever we want to do, and at the end of the day, when we know that okay, we want to return back our value to the person that called that missed this value, we say resolve. This time around, we are not returning. Why? Because promise doesn't know what it is going to return immediately. It has to wait for some time. This actually works here when we are working asynchronously, right? So this time around, we are not returning. Instead, we are resolving, which means, okay, let the person know that this thing is done running and it is successful. And this is the value it expects. But if it is not successful, we are going to reject also with the error that actually went wrong and let the person know, okay, this is what actually went wrong. And then the person will be able to do something like this, that, okay, this promise, then maybe when this promise has finished executing, then we are going to have this function. This is an arrow function that will receive the value or the result that this promise promised us. Then we can do whatever we want to do with that result. Also, maybe this thing couldn't give us our result. Maybe this promise couldn't give us our result. We can catch the error and say, okay, I understand that you couldn't give me what I expect. Then let me know what went wrong. Then we'll catch it. And while catching, we receive an error. We can now do anything we want to do with that error. Confirm you understand that. All right, Daniel, you want to say something?
Okay, sir. Sir, from what you are explaining, seems the error there, is it a standard argument to put in that reject function? And the same thing for the result there that you put. Is it a standard argument?
You mean these ones, right? These two guys?
Yes.
Yes, they are the standard. That's the way you call the promise, or you initialize a promise. You always have these two guys. You cannot name it anything, but you always have them. Are you getting me? So when you are successful, you call the first one, which is the result. And then when you fail, maybe something went wrong, you call the second one. Are you getting me? All right. So that is about promises. About promises. We'll be moving on to the next one, which is async and await. Async and await. Async and await. Let's create a new file. Async await. .js. And back to our index.html. All right, back to our index.html. We'll be linking our async await file. Async await file. So I know this promise that we just did is a little bit more complex, but when you start using async and await, you understand it better. So async and await makes promises easier to write. So instead of having to go through all this headache, you just use async and await. So what does that do? How do we do that? So when you add an async keyword before a function, makes the function return, it makes the function return a promise. So let me just return hello world, and then we'll have to give a name to our function. Let's say async function. Or let me just say my function. If I hover here, you can see that this thing returns here. You see that it returns a promise of a string. You can ignore this string, but this function will return us a promise. Why? Because we already had async here. So what I can do is just say my function dot then, you can say I have this here, and I can say to receive the value, that's the thing returned by the function. Then I want to say console.log. So I'm calling my function, and then, which means when it is successful, I want to log this to the console. You can see I have hello world. Do we have a question? Does anyone if you understand that, just use the emoji. Only good news. Let me take that again. When you add this async command, or is it? Yes, when you add this async keyword before declaring your function, before the function keyword, that means this function will return a promise, which means that it will return this thing, but you are letting the person calling this function knows that it won't return it immediately. You have to wait for it. Are you getting me? It's like Mr. Johnson saying I should collect something from Daniel. And then when I got to Daniel's place, Daniel is doing something. I'll have to wait for Daniel to finish whatever he's doing. And then he will give me what I'm expected to have. That's the same thing we are doing here. We are saying once you put this async function keyword, you are telling the person calling this method that don't worry, I'll return you something, but it is not immediately. So what the person can now do is that, okay, this guy now, he said he will return us something, but he said that it will take some minutes before, some moments, maybe 3 seconds, 5 seconds or so on, before it gives us what we expect. So what are we going to see? We'll now say then, maybe when it's done running, then here we have access to the value that the guy is going to give us. We can now do whatever we want to do with it, which is to log it to the console. Please confirm if you understand that. I'm going to create a function. I'm going to create a function here. I'm going to create a function somewhere coming. I'm going to create a sleep function, which is going to return our time in milliseconds. And then what are we returning? We are returning a promise. a new promise, right? And then what do we want the promise to do when it is done running? You can say you can just say, I'm trying to make this thing easier. You can say constant okay, like I said, this promise is going to receive two values. It's going to receive the resolve and the reject, right? And what do we just want to do? We want to resolve and when we are calling our resolve, we want to set timeout. We want to set timeout. We want to, okay, this is what we are going to do. We want to set timeout of the resolve at the time we are getting. Sorry, a moment, please. Are we still connected? All right, so what I have here is a sleep method that's going to return a function. And what's going to happen inside the function? We are setting timeouts. What do I say? What do I say set timeout does? It's waits for the number of time you put here in milliseconds to call this function. And what's this function? The resolve function that we received. So what are we going to do? I want us to do something. So this sleep function is just there. It doesn't really have a business with what we are doing, but we'll be using it. So what we have a business with here is this async and await. So like I said, when you put async in a function, before if you put async keyword before your function keyword, it means this function will return a promise. And inside that function, you can do whatever you want to do. At the end of doing what you want to do, you are returning something. The difference, what makes this difference from our normal functions here, where is it? From our normal function, from something like this, yeah, we did function v2 here. From something like this, you know, we have return statements. Let's say I have return how are you. This thing, this function, when you trigger it, it will return how are you immediately after running these guys, right? It will run this one first, and return what you have here. Are you getting me? But when it is an asynchronous function, something like this, it means that it will have to do some things that even the function itself doesn't know when it is going to finish it. Are you getting me? That is why it is a promise. When someone promises you something, that person is not giving you immediately. The person is just going to give you. It is a promise that I'll give you later, but not now, because I have some other things to do. So what are we going to do here? We'll say await. Wherever you use async, you can use await and say sleep for, let's say, 5,000 milliseconds. So what this is going to do is that it will wait. This await means wait till this thing is done. Wait till this thing is done doing whatever it wants to do. Till this method is done executing before you go to the next line. Wherever you have your async, you can use await, which means this function now has to wait for this guy to finish running before it will now return this thing. So if I come back here, reload, that 5 seconds is too much. Let's just change it to 3 seconds. That's 3,000 milliseconds. So if I come back to reload, you can see it is actually waiting for our sleep to finish running. And then it is returning what we want it to return. Do we understand that? All right. Adebowale, you can go first.
Okay, sir. So my question is, must there always be a timeout or a wait? I mean, more like a set timeout when you are doing an async, or it is expected that an async function will actually take out its own time? Because I think my understanding is that compilation of your script or of your code is done step by step from top to bottom. So when it gets to an async function, you are not expected to wait for it. While the async function is being interpreted underneath, if you go ahead to execute other codes. So my question at this point is that the set timeout, is it compulsory at all times when you are doing something like an async function for you to set the timeout? Or you are using a set timeout just for an explanation of a scenario?
All right. So this is the set timeout here is inside the sleep function. So basically what this function does is it will sleep the system. That's it will make it stop processing for the time you set here, which is 3 seconds. Right? And why are we doing that? It's just to give an example, an example of how async and await works. Mostly, your functions will do things you want to do immediately. However, when you are making an API request, right? When you are making an API request, you are not sure how long it will take, and it is not coming, the response is not coming back immediately. So if you make a network request, you'll have to wait, which means still sleeping, something very similar to sleeping. That is why we are using sleep as an example. So let's say I want to say fetch google.com. Google.com. Yes. It's expecting a response, blah, 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 blah. If we are fetching google.com, which means we are making a network request to google.com, we'll have to wait for that network request to finish, unless you don't need the result of that request. Unless you don't actually need the result of that request, you'll have to wait for it to finish before doing the next thing you want. So let me show you that. Let me come back here. That's 404. HTTPS. Okay, this is a CORS error. CORS error. Let me look for an example website that doesn't have CORS error. All right, so let's just use news.example.com. Is it news? Just give me a moment, please. So this CORS error that I was saying, it means that we do not have access to visit Google from our local host, especially from this URL, because it is not the same way. You can see access to fetch google.com from origin. This is our local host. Has been blocked by CORS policy. It's just to protect. It's just to protect the Google system from hackers, from malicious users. So I'm looking for how best we can do that. We can just start. I think this should work. Example.com API. I think this should work. We are having the same error. But typically, if you are making an API request, you
can try the one on the.
Okay. Okay. Method not allowed. Method do not allow. I think it expects a post request.
I sent the complete link. I don't know. Maybe it's maybe because it's.
All right. Okay. At least it is returning us something. So let's try that. Okay. So if you can see my screen very well. Sorry, if you can see my screen very well. You see that we have time here. You see that we have time here, which means the time it took this request to be completed. This is 429 milliseconds. That's like half a second, right? So let's now assume that this thing, even the half a second, you still have to wait for it. Because if you don't tell your system that it should wait for this, let's do something here. Let's say constant URL is this. If you are not telling your system to wait for this request, it will return this immediately. It will just trigger this one and return this one immediately. And what if you now have a response? Let's say constant response. And you're trying to use the response here. Let's say console.log. You're trying to use the response here. It won't go. Why? Because it will even be a promise why you have to still wait for the response. So if you don't want to be using this then you have to wait till they finish doing what it is doing. Sorry, please hold on. All right, so like I was saying, I believe everyone is still hearing. Like I was saying, when you use this await, you are waiting for the result of this thing. Just like we have here, I can actually just say, since this thing will return, maybe let's do that. We have await here. We can say, since this function will return us something, we can say another function to still have to be await. Let me print what we have here for you. Okay, so this is the response we got. This is the response we got from the fetch request you made, right? If I remove this await keyword and then come back and reload, you can see I have a promise, which means this thing promised us something, but you didn't wait for the guy to finish what he's doing. So, I mean, it is promising us something. Just like me promising Daniel that I'll give him something, and he's not waiting. I'll keep giving him a promise, and then I'll give you tomorrow. But if Daniel can wait for me to finish what I'm doing, or if he can wait till tomorrow, then I'll hand over what I want to give him. I'll hand it over to him, which is this actual response. Are we getting that? Daniel, you want to say something?
Yes, I wanted to ask, since this async we make our function to become like a promise, is there any way to resolve? Is there any, like, if there's a rejection, how do we do that too?
All right, so what you want to do inside here is to throw an exception. It's to throw an error. Throw something went wrong. So when you throw something, when you throw an error, the rest of the code won't run. If I come back, you can see I have something went wrong. So what I can now do is to say, let's catch the error. Sorry, please. The error. We want to log that to the console.log error. Error is identified. So this should be ERR, which is this ERR we are receiving here. All right. I thought someone was raising his hand. Okay, so Daniel, that answers your question. If you want to throw something, let's say this thing should fail, you have to throw manually. And then if you are not throwing as well, I think this one will be throw. Sure. Okay, it's not throwing. But once you throw an error, it will trigger this reject. The async and await does that behind the scene. So what you need to do is just throw, and it will run all these things. You reject it to run it behind the scene for you. Are you getting it? Again, let me come again. When you use the async, all you have to do is to wait for the function you want to get the value and then continue what you are doing. If you are not waiting, you keep getting a promise. That is promising you that I'll give you this thing, but if you can wait, I'll give you immediately. I'm done. But you still have to wait. So you wait for me before you continue what you are doing. Are you getting it now? And then when calling the function, you can say .10. So because this thing also returns a function. Like I said, when you add async keyword before declaring your function. It will return a promise, and then with the promise you can then say then. You don't, yes, you can say then or catch the error. And if you don't want to do that, you can also say, let's say function, another function. Another function. And this is also an async function. No, it's also an async function. And like I said, inside an async function, you can use await. And this guy also returns a callback. You can now say function. Right? Sorry, my function. So what this is going to do is that it will trigger this my function, right? And then it will wait for the value, which is this return. Let me comment this out, which is this return at the end of this thing. But it will wait for this guy to finish running all this ATM, for this API request and so on. Then wait for the results. And then what can we do with the results? We can say constant greetings is what is this? Is the value that this guy will return to us after waiting, because you have to wait till it is done getting the value, it is done computing the value. And what can we do with the value? We can say console.log result value is waiting. And what are we doing? We want to trigger this another function. So this another function is an asynchronous function, and inside this we are going to wait for this guy to finish running before running this. Why are we waiting? Because we need the value of this guy. We need the value this function will return. We need it in this greeting. So that means we can't proceed. We can't even proceed without having this value. That is why we have to wait till it is done running, and then it will give us what we did, so we can continue doing whatever we want to do with that. So let me reload again. Say I have result value is everywhere, which is what this guy is returning. If I come here and say return hello Daniel, come back here. Let me try switching my network to something around 3G, so it will be a bit slower. See that. It's not even slow. All right, so this took 2 seconds. 2 seconds. Let me look for, if I say offline, it will even go at all. So what I'm trying to do is to make sure that this thing is not coming immediately. That was why I had to. Yes, so you are saying that this, let me comment this out. Let me comment this out. Sorry. Or let me just say, when this thing is finished running, you can say console.log API request finished. Right, and before it, we can say making API requests. So we'll be able to see the differences. All right, so let's read it. Making API requests. Now it is done running. You can see that it had to wait. The attendance will be sent to the Slack channel by Mr. Samuel. So it had to wait to to finish the execution of this API request before triggering these other ones that are under it. That is why we have this await keyword. So let me just come here and assume, let me just trigger this and remove the await that we have. Let me remove await like this. So you see that everything is running together. Are you getting me now? Everything is running together even before the API request is successful. So that means if you want it to run, if you want other things to wait for this thing, you have to put await. You can see that making API requests, API request is finished and result is blah, 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 blah. So it is waiting, it is actually waiting for the API request to run before moving to the next line. Again, let me come again. If I remove await from here, everything will run together without waiting for this fetch to finish. Imagine you are trying to log in a user and maybe you've sent an API request to the backend and you are not waiting for the request to give you a response. That means you don't even know what to do with the user if the email details, if the login details is correct. So let's say a user wants to log in, you have to wait for the API to do all the validation, do this, do that, and give you a response. You cannot do whatever you want to do with the response. But my point here is, when making an API request, especially a request you don't know how long it will take, you don't always know how long an API request will take, then you have to wait for it to run. Does everyone understand that? I'm saying just 3 people. All right. I think we can still do one more thing tonight. We can still do one more thing tonight, which is try and catch block. Try and catch block. Try and catch block. So I did something here. This thing I did here, that when it is done, I want it to catch. Right? Let me just uncomment this thing. And you can see, if I reload this, I'll have my error back. But don't forget, we are throwing after the API request. So you should have to wait for the API request too. So let's see. You can see that. Let me reload again. So you can see the error is waiting for this guy to finish running, right? And what we did here is just to catch it at the end. But one other thing we can do, another way we can catch an error is to do try and catch. So when you are doing try and catch, you are saying that, okay, I know that this logic I want to write, or something can just happen and it will not be successful. So if something fails, we want to catch that error, just like we did here. We can say, I want to put try. So you can see my ID is already suggesting me try and catch statement. So this is how you declare a try and catch statement. You try. All right, so like I was saying, this is how to declare a try and catch block, a try and catch statement rather, which means what you are trying to do will be here, and after catching the error, what you want to do with the error will be here. So what are we trying to do? We are trying to do this. So we'll bring it here, and we know that this thing may throw an error. What are we doing here? We are throwing an error. So we know that this thing may throw an error. We want to catch that error. Instead of it logging for us in the console, let me comment on this try and catch out. Instead of it logging this error to the console like this, we want to catch it and do whatever we want to do with it. So what are we going to do? We are going to say console.log. We're going to make your API request. Because of this error. So in our try and catch statement, well, the actual thing we want to do will be inside this try block. And then what happens when the statement fails? Maybe there's an exception, maybe there's an error, will be here inside the catch block. So let me reload. You can see we now have this making a console, making a log to our console, which is actually telling us, gracefully telling us what happened. That means we are gracefully handling this error. Okay, try and do these things. And if in the process of trying something went wrong, do this. Do we understand that? Let me come again. So this is actually what we had here before. This is what we had here before. Let me remove this. Right. So this is what we had here before. Let me reload. You can see everything is still how it was before. But this error that we are throwing here is actually getting logged to our console. And if you check here, you see uncut. You see uncut, which means it is an uncut error. You are not doing anything with this error. If it is between something, a very important operation in your system, it will just break it and the user will be wondering what's happening. So how can you catch this error? Is we know that the error is being thrown somewhere around inside this place. So what are we going to do is to put this thing inside a try and catch statement. So we are telling this system, this function, that try these things. These two lines of code, try them. If it is successful, we are good. But if it fails, catch the error, right? And what are we doing with the error? We want to log it to the console. We want to log it to the console. Couldn't make your API request and then log in the error too. Then we want to reload. And you can see couldn't make your API request because something went wrong. Do we understand that? Oh, no. All right, Daniel, you want to ask?
Okay, so my question is, in this case now, it seems the error is catching the error. So why is it catching the error? Is it that there is something wrong with our code, or like why is it the first two lines not executing, and this one is now executing?
The first two lines, you mean this one?
Yes, like this try now, you are telling the function that it should try this first, and if it's not working, then we should go to the error.
All right,
But
let me show you something. This first line is actually executing, and the error is throwing inside this first line. Why? Because inside this function, we are throwing the error here. Are you getting me? So that is why it is saying that, okay, there's an error somewhere here, and it is catching it. How do we confirm that it is actually running this function? If you see, we have console.log making API request, console.log API request finished. And if you come here again, we have this, which means it is running up to this extent, right? It is because we can see API request finished, it is running up to this extent, or not running up to this extent. So that error is somewhere here. And as you can see, we're actually throwing an error. This throw means throw an error, stop executing, tell the person that there's something wrong. So let me comment that out so you can be sure. So does that answer your question? Now that we don't have an error again, the function is now returning what it's supposed to return, and this one too is now executing. When there's an error, if there's an error here, because the error we were having before was inside this place, it will stop the execution here. It won't go further with this one. It will just stop the execution here and then do whatever you have here. So does that answer your question? Okay. Does anyone else have any question? All right. What's your name? I don't know what your name is. Is it Adelu? Is
Yeah,
it...
hello.
Yeah.
Yes, I don't know.
Okay.
Okay,
What's your
my
question?
question, I wanted to quickly like confirm. You wrote throw, then you wrote a text in a quote. What's the difference
Yes.
between the throw error and then the throw new error with the other quote? You know, we have this throw new error and then this one is just a different thing.
All right. So when you are throwing new error, what I just did here is just to throw an error of a text. But when you are throwing new error, you are throwing an error, which is an object. Something went wrong. I may want to throw different type of errors, not just text. I may want to throw new insufficient font error. No, don't let me do that. Let me throw authentication field error, which is like authentication field error, authentication error rather, which is another error, which we will have to create if we are working with errors now. But that's basically what we are doing. So with this, you can just throw different type of errors, and your system will be able to catch different type of errors. If I'm correct. If I'm correct, yes, it will be able to catch different type of error, and you'll be able to work with. You can say catch error, authentication error. If it is an authentication error, this is what I want to do with it. And if it is maybe an authorization error, you put another catch block and say authorization error, if I'm correct. Authorization error, and do what you want to do with that another authorization error. So that means that you understand that this process can throw different type of errors. It may be syntax error, it may be an authentication error, it may be an authorization error, it may be that the user is not validated yet and it will throw an error. You just want to undo each case gracefully. Maybe some will return back to the user, maybe some will send a mail to the user and inform them about something. You just want to have different conditions for them. But we've not gotten to that yet. When we are working on the backend, we get that where we can throw different type of errors. But here we are just throwing the basic error, which is just a text. I hope you understand that. Okay. Does anyone else have any question? I believe we are all good. So can some is Mr. Johnson here with us? Is here. So Mr. Johnson, we are done. I am done for today. If we can have someone that can give us a recap of what we've learned so far. Can someone give us a recap of what we've learned so far? That's today. Can everyone hear me? All right. Can someone give us a recap of what we learned today?
Hi,
Mr.
good evening.
All right.
Thank you very much, I am Michael, for that wonderful session. Could you all please confirm you can hear us? You can stop sharing your screen. Please confirm you can hear us. Oh, great, great, great. So, we've learned a lot today, and I am the Michael, our instructor, has dished out a lot. You try and catch. So please, I need you to unmute your mic. Just give a brief recap. Okay, what was the highlights for you? What did you learn today? And just a brief summary of what we've learned. So while we are doing that, I'll also drop the attendance link so we can fill. So please just give us a nudge and then or unmute your mic and give us like a recap of what we've learned. For me, I've learned a lot. I can say, but I'm not just the only one in this course. So let's unmute your mic and say something. At least let's keep the class lively and interactive.
Sorry, I was away for a while. Have I missed anything?
Nothing, not really. Basically, I'm just asking, you know, um, the members or the class members to give a recap of what we've learned. So we have Uloka Ngozi. I'm raising up a hand. Kindly unmute your mic and tell us what you've learned today or so far. Yeah. Yes, please go on. We can hear you. Please unmute your mic and speak. And also confirm you can hear me. Look, I think you are having issues in, your mic is having issue. We cannot hear you. I think you should maybe leave the meeting and join again. That way, I think that would work. So while Uloka is trying to do that, we have Nkiriwaji. Kindly unmute your mic and speak.
Yeah, hello, good evening. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. For the most of the class, though, I was in transit, so I wasn't really hearing much. But I think I grabbed when we were talking about promises, how to put promises in function, and then what it returns, how to catch error, and then what I got the most was where I was talking about asynchronous and synchronous functions, and then how you try catch error and all that. Those are basically what I got from today's class. Yes.
Thank you very much. So, does anybody want to add? Do we have anybody that wants to add to what he has said? Spoke about the asynchronous and synchronous function, promises, and also, does anybody have any other thing to add or say? We have okay, Uloka, you're back. Welcome back. Kindly unmute your mic and tell us what you've learned for today. Just a brief recap. If you have a question as well, please ask your question. We're still finding it difficult to hear you. I think there's issue with I don't know maybe your mic. Yeah. Okay, we have Daniel raising his hand. Daniel, please unmute your mic.
Okay, basically, the instructor talked about callback functions from the beginning, and basically, callback function is where we call a function in another function. So basically, that's what I learned from that. I will still have to go back and research more on that. And he talked about promises, where a promise is a function that will can execute two functions in it, which is like a response and a reject. So if there's an error, it will reject, and if it's successful, there will be a response. Also, he talked about asynchronous functions, which are like promises also. So basically, that's what I learned today.
Awesome, 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 great. Um, we have quite a lot of people on this call. Why is everybody we are just having few responses? I mean, everybody should talk. We have Stephen, Samuel, Oladimeji, Oladili, Nkeraji, Moses, Makin, Lindy. I don't think I've heard from you today. What's going on? Tell us. Are you in this call? Are you in this? So.
No, I was just following, I was just following the lesson because normally because we are 1 hour ahead, so it's almost nap time. So I just follow, and then once I do get time, then that's when I get a chance to like watch the class again on YouTube, and then I would understand more. So for now, I was just following the instructor. Then I'm still gonna go back tomorrow and just see, and then write notes, and then tomorrow's class, that's when I'm gonna come back with questions.
Oh, great, great, awesome. So I dropped the link to for attendance. It's on the chart. Please fill it out. So after filling it out, then you can then we close for the day. We call it a night. So please, how many of us have filled the form?